Thank you all for being here this evening virtually. Merci à tous d'être ici virtuellement ce soir. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the Gallery McClure is situated in Jojage, Montreal, the unceded Indigenous territory of the 𝒂💂💂 Nation. Nous sommes reconnaissants de pouvoir exercer nos activités sur ce territoire et de partager notre expérience avec la communauté. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. This evening, I have the great pleasure of introducing Judith Berry. Ses œuvres ont été diffusées dans le cadre d'expositions individuelles à travers le Canada, notamment dans les villes de Montréal, Toronto, Calgary, et Ottawa. This has included exhibitions at the Musée du Québec and the Canada Science and Technology Museum. Her work is in various collections, including the City of Ottawa, Musée du Québec, and the Art Bank of the Canada Council, and she is represented by Galerie Armure here in Montreal. With this guided visit, she will talk with you about her exhibition at the McClure Gallery. Cette expo, intitulée En attendant printemps or Waiting for Spring, expose ses peintures récentes où le paysage s'affranchit de son ancrage gravitationnel. I really would encourage you to add questions to the chat box, and I'll ask your questions to Judith at the end of her talk. So veuillez ajouter vos questions dans la fenêtre de clavardage. Je poserai vos questions à la fin. So now we will hear from Judith herself. Welcome, Judith.
Hi, good evening. Just wanted to start by thanking everyone at the gallery. It's been a real pleasure to set up this exhibition. Thanks very much to Renee Duval, who helped me hang the show, and to Natasha Reed, also to Margarita Leal, who's doing the technology for us this evening, and to Barbara Wisnowski, of course. So thanks very much. I found it interesting when I was hanging the show that Renee said to me, a lot of people don't really know how to look at your paintings. So what I thought I would do is put together a little sort of history of my painting up to the point of this show, and then show you a few of the works in the show. And then we'll have a sort of virtual tour, a little video of the show at the end of my speech or my artist talk. So just to begin with, I'd like to say I've always thought of these paintings as landscape, but I realize when you look at them, they don't particularly look like landscapes, at least not like typical landscapes. And I'd like to start by going to the first image. But before I do, just one note, because some people have contacted me after I sent out the invitation to say, they're sorry the gallery isn't open. The gallery is open. You can go and see the show. There's no opening. And I'm here in my bedroom, but the gallery is open and the pieces are there. So just going to share my screen to show you the PowerPoint of the images. Okay, just a moment. Okay, so here we have it. This is the image that's on the invitation card. And before I go way back in history, I just wanted to say this is the painting that actually inspired the title, Waiting for Spring, En attente du printemps. Pardon, je vais faire le discours ce soir en français et en anglais. Donc, je voulais dire, je travaillais sur ce tableau au mois de mars-avril l'année dernière. Donc, on était au début de la pandémie. Il me semblait que ça avait déjà duré assez longtemps et c'était un hiver assez long et froid. Et j'avais le sens que le printemps ne viendrait jamais. Donc, c'est un genre de peinture fin d'hiver pandémique avec le désir du renouveau. It's about the desire for renewal, this painting. And renewal is is a kind of recurring theme in my paintings, both in terms of form. I like to manipulate and renew the form of the painting, and then also just in the recreation of the self or the changing landscapes. So here I am going to go back all the way to 1995, just because I can. And this is a painting called Eight Impossible Hills. C'est huit collines impossibles. Et c'est un grand tableau de 6 pieds par 8 pieds et c'est juste pour montrer qu'il y a certains thèmes dans mes peintures, mes paysages qui n'ont pas changé. Hem, il y a dans ce tableau, il y a un genre de référence à la forme humaine. It's at the same time, it's a landscape and it's also like a portrait, like a figure, or kind of like a still life as well. And this sort of fusion of landscape, still life, and portraiture is something that repeats itself in my paintings. Donc, on voit pas de proche, mais il y a beaucoup de tactilité, beaucoup de petits gestes répétitifs dans cette peinture. Donc, il y a un genre d'illusion. C'est essayer de créer une illusion, mais la perspective est peu profonde vraiment. Et il y a un genre de tactilité sur la surface de la peinture. Donc, ça, c'est un genre de tension entre les trois dimensions et une peinture qui est plus sur la surface. So the paintings kind of fluctuate between abstraction and representation. I like to maintain, or hope to maintain, the tension between those two things. Donc ça, c'est un deuxième tableau aussi un peu de même époque qui s'appelle Vertical Hill with Crevice. Il faut dire dans cette période, la fertilité était un genre de sous-texte dans beaucoup de mes tableaux. C'était pendant la période quand j'avais mes enfants, quand mes enfants sont nés. Donc, il y a ça. Il y a le prochain tableau aussi qui s'appelle Thwarted Tunnel Project. I'm not quite sure how to translate that in French, mais il y a comme des formes qui ressemblent à une anatomie humaine, mais en même temps, c'est un paysage. Et il y a toujours un sens d'humour et aussi de menace dans les peintures. C'est un genre de... there's always a mix of humor and also of foreboding or something slightly threatening in the in the in the painting. So here's this tunnel out of which is growing a sort of watermelon like figure, which is not going to fit in the next tunnel. Water in the paintings is often kind of in between movement and stagnation as well. You will see this green water repeating itself. Ce tableau-là s'appelle Forteresse, Triptych de la forteresse, Fortress Triptych. Et il y a beaucoup de triptyques aussi dans mes peintures parce que j'aime l'idée d'une genre de passage du temps, ou l'idée que les différentes sections, même si elles se ressemblent pas tellement, pourraient être la même place dans différentes époques de l'histoire. Que le paysage cache plusieurs niveaux, plusieurs couches de temps ou de l'histoire. Et aussi, on voit sur le panneau à droite un genre d'aperture. La peinture est comme percée ou j'ai sablé un genre de trou dans la peinture. Ça, c'est aussi quelque chose qu'on va avoir plusieurs fois. C'est un peu pour montrer qu'il y a une illusion, une opacité, mais il n'y a rien en dessous, que les formes sont un peu vides. Et cette peinture-là était inspirée par une photo inspirée inconsciemment par une photo de mon enfant plus jeune à la pataugeoire. So it's the gesture and proportions of a child. There is this sense of impermanence, the vegetable forms, the sticks, uh, and also a sense of humor. I'll go a little faster. This one, figure line in the desert, personnage couché dans le désert, a aussi ce genre de mélange de menace et d'humour aussi. On ne sait pas si les personnages autour, le personnage couché, sont là pour l'aider ou s'ils sont menaçants. On ne comprend pas exactement c'est quoi la situation. So it's also a mix of menace and humor. Note that the ground is made of many little touches of paint. It's like made of little bricks. It also gives the idea of something that is transforming or that mutates. That is a thin skin over something else. Une autre peinture un peu de la même époque. Ces derniers deux tableaux sont des grands tableaux, un peu, ça c'est 5 pieds par 10, l'autre peut-être un peu plus grand. Ça s'appelle Four Figures with Match and Hose. Donc, aussi, je voulais inclure cette peinture parce qu'il y a des éléments qui s'opposent l'une à l'autre et qui se neutralisent. Donc, on voit la personnage avec l'allumette. We see the person with the match et aussi le personnage avec le tuyau, the person with the hose. There are opposing elements, the fire, which is the force of destruction, and the water, which will neutralize it, and a kind of landscape within the landscape, the little landscape in the middle of the painting. Il y a quelque chose aussi qu'on voit dans cette peinture qui est dans plusieurs de mes tableaux. Il y a un genre de jeu entre qu'est-ce qui est monumental et qu'est-ce qui est gérable, petit, manipulable. The play between what is monumental and what is something that we can manipulate. So we don't know whether, well, in this one it's fairly obvious that there are figures manipulating a tiny landscape, but in many of them the landscape could be something to be manipulated, like objects or blocks on a rug, or they could be monumental forms. Ça, c'est notre paysage de la période. Je ne sais pas à quelle année on est rendu. Ça, c'est probablement 80, 99, quelque chose comme ça. Et je voulais l'inclure parce que c'est aussi un triptyque avec une genre d'histoire, une narration qui n'est pas exactement une narration avec des panneaux qui sont vraiment consécutifs. On ne sait pas qu'est-ce qui vient en avant et en après. Ils sont un peu interchangeables. So it's a triptych also that contains the idea of narration. But the panels, there's no strict sense as to into which order they occur. So this painting also, if you see it closer, is actually quite tactile. There's a sort of a rough tactile surface with many, many little touches. Hard to see it on your screen, probably, I know. So it has this kind of play between 3 dimensions and abstraction, a sort of illusion of depth, which is not very profound, not very deep, which is also why I like to deal with these kind of semi-aerial perspectives. Donc, ça, c'est un autre personnage avec un genre de contradiction. Parce que le personnage saute et c'est entre quelque chose qui est comme un peu joyeux et quelque chose qui est peut-être menaçant. La personne est effrayée et effrayante au même temps. Ça s'appelle Scarecrow. Et c'est pas clair si le personnage va vers le haut ou vers le bas. But what goes up must come down. So there's a little There's a little bit of menace in this painting because the feet are made out of something like watermelons, which are probably going to come apart when the figure lands. This is actually kind of life size. The panel is about 8 feet high. Ça, c'est notre triptyque et je l'ai inclus parce que j'aime, ça s'appelle Folded Valley Triptych, la vallée pliée, le triptyque, la vallée pliée. Et j'aime l'idée que le paysage se plie où il y a des formes qui sont plutôt sur une surface plane, qui se plient et qui deviennent des formes tridimensionnelles, et aussi l'idée de la même espace dans dans un paysage qui change à travers le temps. Euh, donc, il y a un genre de personnage qu'on voit à peine sur le bord, sur le panneau droit. Et aussi un petit chemin qui rentre dans le paysage et qui sort en même temps. Euh, Ça, c'est notre grand tableau de à peu près 6 pieds par 8 pieds. Souvent, les grands tableaux contiennent beaucoup d'idées qui viennent des petits tableaux. Donc, c'est pour ça que j'en montre beaucoup. C'est un genre de une place où les idées de certaines époques se ramassent. Donc, ça s'appelle Friday Afternoon Postponed, l'après-midi de vendredi reporté. Et ici aussi, j'utilise souvent des éléments comme des bâtons qui sont moins permanents à côté des structures qui sont plus permanentes. Donc, j'aime beaucoup l'idée que chaque élément dans le tableau est en train de se transformer, qui peut devenir quelque chose de différent, peut devenir des autres éléments. Donc, aussi, j'aimais l'idée que dans les tunnels, on ne voit pas dedans les tunnels. Donc, il y a des parties du tableau qui sont cachées. So yeah, I also like the idea of the tunnels because it's like part of the life in the painting is actually hidden from the viewer. And there's a sort of a movement, both a movement and a stagnation to the water, un genre de stagnation, excuse-moi, et un mouvement pour l'eau qui c'est fluide, mais pas très fluide. Et juste à revenir un petit peu à ce tableau-là, le rouge qui est en dessous, c'est j'utilise souvent ce genre de fond rouge. J'aime l'idée que le paysage soit un peu comme un pot, que le fond rouge, c'est un peu comme le sang dans le corps. C'est quelque chose de chaud qui est juste en dessous de la surface et, euh, et c'est quelque chose de changeable. Ça, c'est un autre grand tableau, another larger painting called An Alternative Route, that has many of the ideas of the previous ones. I wanted to include it because of this grenade-like form. It's like a bomb of impermanence, something that can change things, or that looks opaque, but which in fact describes something which is empty, qui décrit un vide, mais qui est opaque en même temps. Souvent, j'utilise le noir comme ça, comme quelque chose qui est opaque sur la surface, mais qui pourrait en même temps être un trou dans le tableau. Ça, c'est un petit diptyque. Je voulais l'inclure parce que c'est une période où ma palette devenait un peu plus restreinte. J'aimais jouer un peu plus dans la tonalité et avec les formes qui s'effondrent, qui se forment et qui s'effondrent en même temps, qui est en train de tomber, avec un genre de relation oblique entre les deux panneaux. OK, ça aussi, c'était un point de tournure. This is a turning point in my painting. This is another largish painting. I think it's 5 or 6 by maybe 8 feet. It's called The Wooden Moat, and I liked it because it was a sort of convergence of rural and rural and urban forms. The blocks appeared in this one for the first time. Donc les blocs, c'est comme une petite ville qui se forme aussi, sont comme des blocs qui pourraient être très manipulables, comme des jouets, mais aussi qui pourraient représenter des grandes choses comme des édifices. Donc il y a un genre d'ambiguïté d'échelle qui est souvent dans mes tableaux. Et genre de thème western, un peu avec la structure en bois, qui est un réservoir et la forme qui est dans le in the front of the painting, the empty wooden figure. So also a little bit of the collapsing forms there, blocks falling down, and the sticks that are beginning to collapse here. Donc, j'aime beaucoup cette idée d'un paysage qui est quelque chose qui est en mutation. Il y a un genre de, il y a des choses qui sont très statiques, comme dans ce tableau-là, on voit que les formes que j'appelle moi-même des bateaux, these forms that I call boats aren't really boats. They're sort of between boats and buildings. They have that element of mobility and non-mobility. Um, donc, et aussi l'idée de l'eau qui coule, mais qui est un peu plastique, un peu rigide, un peu contaminée aussi. Donc, une fluidité, un mouvement et un genre de qualité statique. Un autre grand tableau de celui-là date, j'avais pas écrit toutes les années, mais je sais pas, 2005 à peu près, 2006. Donc ça s'appelle Leak et je l'ai inclus parce qu'il y avait cette idée d'un genre de contamination cachée dans le paysage ou l'idée qu'il y a des choses cachées dans le paysage. Donc la contamination, c'est l'apparence de la forme noir et blanc au milieu. And there's also this little hidden city of sticks on the lower left of the painting. And you see again the reservoirs and the idea that this is just on the outside of the outskirts of the city. So here we go. This is called Urban Sprawl Triptych. C'était aussi une des premières fois où la surface avait l'air plutôt tissée et les formes comme des édifices, the building forms were growing out of this kind of woven surface. Et je pense que c'était une des premières fois que j'ai peint un genre de cible qui est un peu comme une force qui attire les autres éléments vers le centre, mais aussi qui les rejette, qui les repousse vers les bords. Ça, c'est un grand tableau de 5 pieds par 10 qui s'appelle Expectations in the New City. On est rendu probablement 2010. Et pour celui-là aussi, j'ai répété les formes des cibles qui deviennent ici tridimensionnelles. Donc, j'utilise les éléments de tableau comme un genre de vocabulaire et, j'essaie toujours de rendre mon vocabulaire plus grand en peinture. I use and reuse my painting vocabulary. Sometimes I hesitate to use a sort of vocabulary I've used before, and then I tell myself, well, it's my vocabulary, I can use it. But I also appreciate the paintings that represent a sort of an advance for me, a new form. Donc, ce que j'ai apprécié dans cette peinture était le genre de tapis qui sort de cette forme, le tunnel au milieu, qui est un genre d'abri, un tunnel, un édifice, où on peut dire un personnage, si on traite l'idée de personnage assez libre. If we think about a figure as very loosely, the object in the middle, which is kind of expelling this rug-like form, could be thought of as a figure. And the sort of rug which is coming out of its mouth is like a speech bubble. And this is something that repeats itself in later paintings, something that I found useful. Donc cette forme est comme un tapis et aussi comme une bulle de discours dans une bande dessinée. C'est un tableau de 5 pieds par 7 à peu près qui s'appelle Doubt. It's a 5 by 7 foot painting called Doubt. Et je jouais beaucoup avec les formes qui ont l'air manufacturées, qui sont semblables, mais pas identiques. Et, et des brosses qui fabriquent, mais aussi qui effacent le tableau en même temps. So there are these kind of scrubbing brushes which create and erase the painting at the same time. And I like the idea that the objects are moving towards a sort of abyss actually in this painting, and there are sort of piles of rope which are more or less debris. So this one was also satisfying for me to work within a fairly narrow color range, so the painting becomes more about tonal relations than other things. Here we have a small painting. This is called Ephemera 1. I wanted to include these next few paintings to show how the small paintings are often like the experimentation ground. They're the places that the bigger paintings grow out of. So this one, I like the fact that the ground began to move and became the painting itself. And there's a sort of reference to figures or forms in the ground, but the ground became a sort of three-dimensional thing, and the bubbles are there to give a little bit of depth to the painting. And there's a slight hint that there's an empty space or a little more depth underneath it, but it all happens within a narrow quite a narrow depth, which for me gives the tension to the painting, but there's also a sense of movement. Donc j'aimais le fait que le fond était tissé, vivant, c'est peu profond, les bulles donnent un genre de profondeur au tableau, et ça c'est Ephemera 2, c'est une diptyque, les deux. Et ce sont des petits tableaux, je les ai inclus pour montrer un peu comment mes petits tableaux deviennent comme la place où j'invente les idées, où je trouve les idées pour les plus grands tableaux qui sont quand même assez imprévisibles. Ça, c'est un autre petit tableau de 1 pied par 1 pied. Ça s'appelle l'Insomnie, Insomnia, another 12-inch by 12-inch painting, which I'm including to show how the ideas often grow out of the little paintings. They're a sort of experimentation ground for me. I realize I should speed up. It's 5:30. This one's called Sleep Triptych. I also I included this one because there's a sort of illogical quality to it, which is there for the first time, and that the ground is pierced by these little holes in which you have little portraits of paintings. Okay, so I'm just going to advance. This is off-target triptych. This is a larger painting, about 11 feet. Also the repetition. Here we are getting to the more recent works. So Little Lariat, the little lariat is the little lasso that comes out of the thumb on the upper right. Donc, j'étais un peu étonnée quand j'ai fait ce tableau, juste par le fait que c'était tellement figuratif qu'on voyait vraiment des mains, mais vu que la peinture était euh, 6 pieds par 7 ou 5 pieds par 8, je pense. J'étais capable de tolérer ce degré de représentation. Donc, les mains qui sont faites des petits blocs et je vais avancer parce que je pense que j'ai trop de choses. Ça s'appelle The Lives We're Making. Again, the idea of repetition, forms that could be in a microcosm or a macrocosm. They could be microscopic, they could be biological, they could be manufactured, but they have they are both similar but not identical. Cette peinture-là et la prochaine, j'ai inclus parce que ils sont dans une exposition en ce moment. C'est le 25e anniversaire de ma galerie à mur et l'expo s'appelle Terra Nova. Cette peinture s'appelle Conversation, The Conversation. Ça s'appelle Conversation. Ça, c'est The Retelling. Et c'était l'idée que les personnages peuvent raconter un paysage, la façon qu'on voit le paysage, qu'on le décrit, créer le paysage, mais aussi le paysage nous décrit, on s'identifie avec le paysage. So the way we describe events or the way that we describe a landscape creates the way we see it, but also the landscape creates the way we see ourselves. And I think I have to move on. So this is the first of the paintings in the show. I'm not going to show all of them, but I will show a few. This is an older painting. It's called Stick Excursion, and I included it because it was one of the first ones in which the forms became much more mobile. They began to liberate themselves more from the landscape. Again, there's this theme of fire and destruction as well as creation in the landscape. This is a larger painting in the show. This is 5 by 7 feet. It's called The Water Table, but I was also tempted to call it A Bad Education. There's a table which is kind of an abstract form with a little representation of the world with the boats and the figures manipulating them. But the table is not really supported by legs as far as you can see. The molecular structures are like an explanation for a scientific concept, but it's, you know, they are simply a representation and they don't really represent anything. You know, I was interested when I looked up molecular structures to see how the way they're represented in science is changing all the time. So we have the little monocular chair here and the forms which have a sort of which are described on the outside of their conglomeration of objects, but they're sort of empty interiors. Donc des formes qui sont décrites par peu d'éléments et les formes moléculaires qui décrit des espaces où il y a une chaise ici qui est créée par des molécules, mais les molécules ne sont pas une représentation de quelque chose de concret. Ça, c'est un autre grand tableau dans l'exposition, 5 pieds par 7, ça s'appelle Encounter. Je me sentais un peu libre d'utiliser mon propre vieux vocabulaire. Ça, c'est le genre de main à gauche. Ça ressemble les formes que j'ai peint il y a très longtemps, mais je me suis dit, je peux faire un mélange de nouveau et de vieux vocabulaire. Il y a des formes qui tombent, qui sont en train de recréer et de se détruire en même temps. Aussi, il y a une grande série de tableaux 20 pouces par 20 pouces qui sont représentés en bloc dans l'exposition. Ça c'est le premier de cette série-là, qui sont tous des genres de portraits dual portraits. This 20 by 20 inch series. There are 12 of these paintings in the show. This is the first one of them. It's not in the show, but they're dual portraits, and they also have a sort of duality of construction and deconstruction, or fire and water creation and destruction. This one is called Mesmerized. The speech bubbles here is appearing again. I was also thinking about calling it Child of the 60s because it's a test bar of a television that we saw on TV all the time when I was a kid. This is called Constructing the Future. Also not in the show, one of the earlier ones. This is Everything's Fine, another of the dual portraits, a little less optimistic. C'est une forme qui va s'effondre avec des gens de langue en terre et en bois. Ça s'appelle Time Spent Together. C'est un peu sur l'intimité et l'humilité et les formes noires et blancs. Il y a un genre de jeu avec ce qui est solide et ce qui n'est pas solide. Et comme ça, j'aime beaucoup utiliser des couleurs claires qui sont très proches au ciel. Donc, on se demande, est-ce que le ciel est solide ou est-ce que le personnage est solide? Est-ce que les deux n'ont pas vraiment de substance? Ça, c'est Undone de la même série. Celui-là est dans l'expo. Ça s'appelle Longing. And I'm going to finish up. This one is also in the show. It's called Galloping by My Head. And this is False Front. Also in the show, a 20 by 20 inch painting containing the themes of the others. So that is it for my images. I'm going to go back to stop screen sharing, go back to StreamYard, to Natasha, and I hope we can, j'espère qu'on peut voir toujours la vidéo qui est le tour virtuel de l'expo qui a été fait par Barbara hier. So this painting is called Lost Worlds Triptych. It's the first painting in the show. All of the works in the show, well, they're mostly from 2019 and 2020, a few 2021s, and there are a couple older pieces. This piece, Stick Excursion, that you saw in my images, is a slightly older piece. This is a piece from 2019 called Prairie River Triptych. Ça date de 2019, Prairie River Triptych. Ça ressemble plus à mes anciens tableaux, mais c'est plus récent. Donc, il n'y a pas vraiment de progression droite. Ça, c'est un très petit tableau qui s'appelle Sign of Spring, une des choses les plus optimistes en expo. Voilà le grand tableau qu'on voit sur l'autre mur. Donc, ça, c'est la série des tableaux 20 par 20. This is the series of 20 by 20 inch paintings, which are all dual portraits. And we decided to hang them in 2 blocks of 6. So again, there's that sort of play between things that appear opaque and which also appear empty. This is the painting The Water Table, or A Bad Education, qui était inspiré par une photo de mon grand-père qui jouait aux cartes avec mon grand-oncle et un voisin. Ça, c'est Lunge Triptych. This is the large painting Encounter. I wanted to include some of these paintings in the images that I showed you in the PowerPoint, just because the resolution is better. We get a better idea. Ça s'appelle Vomiting Figure. C'est un personnage qui vomit, qui détruit un peu un paysage et qui s'examine en même temps. Ça s'appelle I See the Possibilities. Il y a une petite série ça c'est des tableaux 9 par 9 pouces. Qui sont un peu terrain d'expérimentation pour les plus grands. Et ça, c'est un petit tableau qui s'appelle Invasive Thoughts, qui contient des anciens, des nouveaux éléments. Mais c'est très récent, celui-là. Donc, si vous êtes à Montréal, j'espère qu'il y aura des gens qui visitent vraiment l'expo, parce que je pense que qu'on a c'est très différent quand on voit des peintures en réalité. Même que je suis très reconnaissante qu'on puisse faire ça.
It's just wonderful, Judith, to hear you speak about the work and have a little hint of what it looks like in the gallery. But I agree, for sure, it would be wonderful if you guys could come and see the work in person if you are in Montreal. It's obviously an even more spectacular experience. Thank you so much for your presentation. And I do see that there's some comments and lots of comments and wonderful words about your work. Everyone's very enthusiastic. And there are some questions. So I'm going to share, I'm just going to try to, I'm looking for the question marks. Those are my key to figure out which one to pull on. Okay, here. How about this one? They're all coming in at the same time, so I'm getting confused which one's which. Okay, here. Would love to hear you. Okay, from Catherine Fenn. Would love to hear how your childhood has impacted your subject matter. I see references to youth in the humorous figures and some of the other elements.
That's very funny. That's my sister. She was supposed to ask an easy question. Hi, Catherine. How could you do this to me? Well, I think it's very there. I don't think we ever free ourselves from our childhoods. Not that I need to free myself from mine. It's actually had a fairly lucky childhood. But yeah, I think the idea of manipulating objects or constructing and deconstructing things, I mean, those all go back to our childhoods, and there's definitely the familial link in the photograph, which is used as a source for the big painting, the water table. So yeah, there are themes that definitely date back to childhood: matches, destruction, fire, water. We were always fascinated by those things.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, when looking at your work, I'm totally pulled back to childhood, and I can't really figure out what it is that I'm remembering, but it's like lots of different images or dreams that come back to me in seeing your pieces. So I think you spark the child in others as well.
Okay, good.
I have a question here from, I believe it's probably Barbara, because it's the McClure Gallery. So she says, it's interesting that you described one of your more recent works as having a new, more illogical quality to it. And she asks, in what way, and could you comment on this?
That's something I often felt responsible in the earlier paintings to represent a kind of semi-logical space and perspective, to always provide a support or to have these things look like three-dimensional objects on a ground. And I think the one that I made the illogical comment about was the sleep triptych, where I actually pierced the painting with holes and then little portraits of buildings appear behind it. This probably makes no sense to people who don't see the paintings in front of them. But yeah, in the newer ones, I have felt more freed from the responsibility of doing structures which are supported, that look like structures which might actually exist, even though they don't in a landscape. They don't need to be things that you can build. And I don't know why I've allowed myself that. I think it's a trend in kind of contemporary semi-abstract painting that I see more markedly in painters that are 10 years younger than me and less. And when I first began to see some of those paintings, I was kind of ill at ease with them. And I think I still am, actually, but elements of that have crept into my work. I hope that answers the question.
That's great. Thank you. We have a question from Wendy Allen. Waiting for spring seems like a kind of prayer at the beginning of the pandemic. Your other spring painting is more optimistic. How did this last year affect the process and the paintings that are in this show?
Right. Yeah, I think it is a sort of prayer for the pandemic, and I think we're all still waiting in a sense. So, how did the question is really how did the pandemic affect the paintings? I have to say that little optimistic painting, "Sign of Spring," was done before the pandemic. I think there's even so though the paintings appear perhaps lighter in palette or more joyful in sense, I think there is a sense of less supported structures in them, of something that is more collapsible, more air, more mutation, a little more sinister comedy in them. So yeah, I think
That
all
makes
those things are there.
that makes sense. Great, thank you. We have a question from Jennifer Steed. The vantage point from which we view the image seems to be changing as the forms approach the surface. Can you talk about that?
The vantage point from which we view the painting seems to be changing as
So,
the forms of, oh, right. So yeah, like in the 20 by 20 paintings, those are really portraits. They're head on, sort of sideways, and they're not semi-aerial landscapes. And honestly, I think I don't know why that is, Um, I don't know. I guess I've come face to face with the figures, which has sort of freed them, but made them at the same time a little more menacing. They're not stuck to the landscape, as I said before, and yet I'm allowing the light to come through the sky, and the figures have more movement. Um, yeah, and I'm never really quite as sure when I talk about the newer things. So I hope that's enough of an answer for that question.
that's
Thanks.
good.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Okay, here's one that might be easy or it might be more difficult. It's the last question we'll have for this evening, but
Okay.
It's a fun one. 𝒂𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒈 asks you, what's your favorite painting?
This person is called Bip and Bop.
Yeah, that's what I've got here. So
What's my favorite painting? Oh, that's really hard. I okay. I honestly, in the 20 by 20s, I like that painting which is called Galloping by My Head, which has the horse's legs, because when I did that, I thought this is such a crazy idea, but I really freed the landscape from gravity, from the ground, and it would be clear if we go back to that painting, which you can actually see on the McClure website eventually. I think the images of the separate paintings will go up, but
yes.
there are two figures, one on the left, which is quite big, and the other, which is quite small on the right, and the horse's legs galloping in between them.
Yes.
So the difference in size of the figures gives the idea of a distance, or a little, which makes the legs more mobile, gives them more freedom. So I was actually kind of overjoyed when I, even though it seemed like a crazy thing to do, when I painted those horses' legs, which are also like galloping landscapes. So that's my favorite painting in the show. Thank you for that question, Bip and Bob.
It's Marion, actually.
Oh,
I got it.
oh, okay, thank you.
She responded back, it's Marion. Okay, great. Thank you so much. There is one other question. I don't know if oh dear, there's a couple of other questions coming in. I don't know if we have time. They're getting, how about we'll do this last one. Martin Bruyette is asking, what is the process of conceiving your compositions? Is it a very structured and planned process, or is it more intuitive? You mentioned referring to photographs, so could you talk about that process?
I almost never refer to a photograph. I think the one in which I mentioned the photograph was pretty much the only one. I did actually refer to a colored test bar when I did the test bar painting. So sometimes a whole chunk of an idea for a painting comes to me, like in that painting Mesmerized with the TV head color test bar thing. And at the time I was under pressure to paint for a show, and I thought, I have this really stupid idea, but I want to do it. And it was kind of thrilling to set it up Of course, all the pieces weren't there, but to set up my little iPad attached to an ancient monitor next to my table where, next to the wall where I paint a series of steps backwards into more ancient technologies. But the paintings don't often come with as clear an idea like that, and I often really struggle. And it's a more intuitive process, and a lot of them are worked out really on the canvas, and things are erased and put back in, and yeah, it's very intuitive actually.
Great, thank you. So I'm really grateful for this experience, for your wonderful talk. It's a wonderful, phenomenal body of work. You have such a rich, mysterious, and complex visual vocabulary, and I think we're very lucky to have your work at the McClure Gallery. So I want to thank you for this presentation and for exhibiting your remarkable paintings at the McClure. Merci à tout le monde qui était présent pour cet événement. I hope many of you will come to visit this magnificent exhibition, which opens tomorrow, March 5th at noon. If you want to send a little email to us at the gallery just to book a time to come in, we encourage you to. It's not mandatory, but just to make sure, because we have a maximum number of people we can have in the space at a time, of course. So venez voir l'exposition à la Galerie McClure, and I want to wish you all a great evening. Thank you again, Judith. Merci et bonsoir.
Merci.
À bientôt.
À bientôt. Merci beaucoup.
Bye.
Bye.